Great to see you too. So let's get right into it, Ross, because training camp's starting in a few days here, and there's no dead time in the NFL. I wanted to start in with you on what I know it doesn't involve the Texans, but it involves a former Texan that people are still have a lot of feelings for here in Houston, and that's DeAndre Hopkins signing with the Tennessee Titans. Wanted to get your thoughts on the impact that you feel like DeAndre Hopkins is going to have for the Tennessee Titans this season.
Thought it was really interesting. Now, first of all, I'm not a big fan or believer in guys, quote unquote, ring chasing. Look, if that's what they want to do with their lives, go for it. But you know how hard it is to know which team's going to win the Super Bowl and be on that team. I mean, everybody says, "Oh, just go to the Chiefs." It's been 20 years since anybody repeated back to back.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do. Okay, and it's also easy to say, "Oh, just go play for the Chiefs, win the championship," or the Bills. The Bills have had Josh Allen as their quarterback for 5 years, starting quarterback. They've been to one AFC championship game. I mean, what? Good luck chasing a ring there, right? So the idea that these guys will sign for less than a third of what Odell Beckham Jr. got to play for these teams, I always thought was ridiculous. I'm glad DeAndre realized that. You know, I think everybody would love to win a championship, but that's really hard to do. What I like about what DeAndre did is, first of all, Nashville's awesome. Probably a sensitive subject for you guys, but Nashville is an amazing city. But I think it's more interesting the message that the Titans signing Hopkins sends. Because all offseason, I, like a lot of people, have kind of wondered, what is Rand Carthon doing with the Tennessee Titans? I mean, they kind of revamped their whole O-line. They're basically going young and cheap on the O-line, which sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. They take Will Levis high in round 2. So you're like, okay, they're kind of rebuilding. You know, they moved on from Ben Jones and some of the vets on the team. They tried to get by to take a pay cut, thought they might move on from him. They didn't re-sign David Long, etc. But then they made some other moves. They still have Tannehill as their quarterback. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to do both, right? I think the AFC South, let's be honest, is bad enough that Vrabel believes they can kind of retool, rebuild at certain spots and still win the division. I mean, last year, even without Tannehill, they had the lead in the fourth quarter against the Jags in the win-in-you're-in game. And if Dobbs doesn't fumble, and they got Dobbs like 2 days before the game, they win the division last year. So I think Vrabel wants to be able to look at Kevin Byard, Jeffrey Simmons, Derrick Henry, some of those guys and say, we're going to win the division. Then we're going to make a run in the playoffs. And DeAndre Hopkins, I think, really gives them that chance. You know, I don't think the Colts will be great with the rookie quarterback. Texans the same. So I think Vrabel looks at the Jaguars and says, you know what? If Tannehill's healthy and you get me DeAndre Hopkins, we'll beat the Jags. We'll win that division.
They could win that division. The big problem is Hopkins hasn't done much in 3 years. He's missed 15 games these last 2 years, 9 because of injuries. He never got hurt here. And now he's had 2 different things hurt the last 2 years. You always worry about when a guy gets his age. He just turned 31. And he's certainly capable of being great again. You know, he was great with a lot of bad quarterbacks. He's got one now who's mediocre, and he'll help Treylon Burks more than anybody because if Hop stays healthy and plays the way he's capable, he'll get a lot of double teams, which means Burks will be singled up.
No, there's no question. And I really think, John, he's not the player he was in Houston, and he's not going to be. But he's still pretty darn good. I mean, I think he caught 70-some balls last year or something, even though he was suspended, missed all those games with different quarterbacks in Arizona. I think he's what the Titans needed, which is if they're loading the box, take some pressure off Treylon Burks. Don't make him have to be the number one stud receiver. He can still grow into that role. I don't think Hopkins is as much of a deep threat as he used to be. Still has great hands. Still really good against zone coverage. Still excellent on the boundary and gives Tannehill that option he needs, especially on some of those third downs. They have a really good tight end in Chigakonkwo. And, I think they just realized they needed someone reliable. I don't think Hopkins – I'll be really interested to see if anybody doubles him. I don't know that he's a guy that dictates coverage anymore. And if he doesn't, I think he can be productive again.
So Ross, well, the Madden people like him because they gave him a 93. I will say that. I want to shift gears with you here and get over to the Texans. I'm going to answer the question you would normally ask me and Seth when you come on with us is, how are they feeling in Houston about the Texans right now? I'm going to tell you up front, we're way more excited about the Texans now than each of the last 2 years that we've done radio with you. People are super excited here, so I want to get your thoughts on what I think a lot of people think are massive upgrades that they finally made at the head coaching. So the two most important spots, head coach and quarterback. What are your thoughts about DeMeco Ryans and the combination of DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud for this rebuilding team?
Well, DeMeco Ryans is like a unicorn, man. I don't know that I can ever think of another player who every organization he's been associated with just oohs and ahs with their praise for this guy. I mean, I don't even remember how many years he was in Philly. They love him. Like, they love DeMeco Ryans. And I'm not sure what he does to ingratiate himself this much. I mean, I think he was a pretty good player for the Eagles. I don't think he was a great player for the Eagles, but the way he goes about his business, I'll never forget Chip Kelly when he was the coach here. He totally butchered the Lion King. You guys got to Google this. But he called DeMeco like Mufasa or Simba or something. He called him somebody he wasn't. But what he was trying to say is that, like, DeMeco's our guy. DeMeco's the choice. I think maybe he called him Scar, the bad guy, or maybe he called him Simba. I don't know. But that just goes to show how respected he is everywhere he's been. I mean, John probably knows more than I do, but seems like Denver really wanted him to be their head coach over Sean Payton. Really wanted him. But he wanted to come to Houston. I think that speaks well to the franchise, to Nick Caserio, that even after back-to-back one-and-done guys, that DeMeco still felt like Houston was the place for him. As for Stroud, really curious to see how things go for him. I think the Georgia game helped tremendously because it showed he can run a little bit. Sometimes you'll wonder, you talk to people, and I never knew he could run. And I think some of these guys, they don't want to be known as running quarterbacks. So they don't run even though they can. And quite frankly, Ohio State, he didn't have to. I think the learning curve for him, similar to Haskins, similar to Justin Fields. You ever watch an Ohio State game the last couple of years? It's unbelievable. Like 2 years ago, Stroud's first year, every time I flipped the Ohio State game, Chris Olave would catch a post for a touchdown, and there was nobody within like 20 yards of him. I'm like, who are they playing right now? It's like, oh, okay, that's Northwestern. They're actually not bad. Like they're playing decent teams. Guys are wide open. The receivers are unbelievable. Clean pocket. Their tackles are Paris Johnson. They're always going in the first round. I think the supporting cast and the surrounding is so good at Ohio State that I think it really is a big adjustment for some of these recent Ohio State quarterbacks when they come in the NFL and the receivers aren't wide open and it's not a clean pocket. I think that'd be adjustment for everybody, but I think it's stark contrast for those guys.
That's a great point, Ross, about those players that he played with. The thing about his running ability, he had 72 yards against Northwestern. He ran, but he said at the combine, why would I want to run when I have so many great receivers who are open? If I'm selfish and I'm running the ball, I'm never going to hear the end of it from them because they're open. My job's to get them the ball. So he proved several times in his 2 years as a starter that if he needed to run, he could run.
So funny too, isn't it, John? Because it was like 10 years ago that we were saying to these guys, better not run in the NFL. Better not. You're going to get hurt. Yeah. These guys that run in college, it's not the way the NFL is. It's like totally flipped. Now it's like, you better run sometimes. I mean, and it works. You know, Hurts had an unbelievable year for the Eagles. Even Daniel Jones ran for over 700 yards, 7 touchdowns, a huge part of the Giants' success last year. And honestly, guys, it's not even the quarterback running as much as it's the threat of the quarterback running and what that creates for the offense.
So, Ross, I want to make sure before we get you out of here, because I know your time is limited, I want to make sure, I think the other, aside from the Texans, the other team or player that Texan fans still have direct interest in, because that's the first round pick the Texans have next season is Cleveland's. Do you think that Deshaun Watson, who was not good in the 6 games he played last year, and he hadn't played in nearly 2 years at that point, do you think Deshaun Watson has a bounce back year in Cleveland this year?
Yeah, so I actually have a question for you guys then after I answer this. The answer is yes, I do think he'll have a bounce back year. I think, you know, having a full year in that system will help him. The O-line's healthy. They have Nick Chubb to run the ball. You know, they did add to the receiving core with Elijah Moore. I think Watson, look, they have to. I'm actually surprised the Browns didn't sign Hopkins, because I think that the head coach and the GM in Cleveland are on the hot seat. I thought as a result that they would pony up the money to get Hopkins there to reunite him with Watson. I think he'll have a bounce back year. I don't think he'll be a top 5 quarterback. Really hard to be that. And I think he was his last full season in 2020, which leads me to my question for you guys. He was unbelievable in 2020. By all accounts, a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. They won 4 games. How is that possible? John, I'll let you go first, but how is that possible? Like, in today's NFL, there is no way you should have a top 5 quarterback and only win 4 games.
They had a terrible coaching. They went through firing Bill O'Brien, and they had a terrible defense that was one of the worst in history against the run. They couldn't stop anybody. And I'll tell you this about Watson. Every game he played here, he played in indoors. He played in Jacksonville, indoors in Indy, good weather, Nashville. Every game will be outdoors in his division. He's never been a good cold weather quarterback. And so I don't think he'll ever compile the stats that he had here. They haven't had a 4,000-yard passer since Brian Sipe. And that was back when I started covering the NFL 47 years ago. So I think he'll be great. They'll run the ball more than they ran the ball here. His stats won't be as good, but hopefully for the Browns and their fans, they'll win games and maybe be a playoff team again.
Yeah. Yeah, Ross, there's nothing much to add to John's thing, except that it was the season after. That was when they traded DeAndre Hopkins. They made Anthony Weaver the defensive coordinator, and poor Anthony Weaver in this whole thing, man. Like, their improvements to the defense were letting DJ Reader walk, overpaying Whitney Merciless, and signing Eric Murray, who nobody knew who he was. We had to Google Eric Murray, the safety. Like, it was bad. It was the gateway to this horrible period of annual coaching searches in Houston. Thankfully, that tradition appears to be over. I think we're not going to have, for the first time in years, we won't have a coaching search in the offseason.
Well, man, I hope so. I mean, because that's been ridiculous. I'm still waiting for the McNairs to hire me for 1 year on like a 4 or 5 year contract. I'll sign up for that right now. I only want to coach 1 year.
Yeah.
Then fire me. Then I'll go do something else.
You can get all the churrascos you can eat after that, right?
Exactly,
let me point out,
exactly, delicious.
everybody that watched Texans those 2 years knew that they did terrible coaching jobs and understood why they were fired.
Yep. Ross, we know you got to get out of here. You've got the Ross Tucker football podcast. You got your little podcast empire going on over there, right?
I'm trying, man. We need you guys to get legalized betting down there for the Even Money podcast. For fantasy football, we got the Fantasy Feast podcast, and it was real fun talking about the 2024 quarterback prospects on the College Draft podcast. It's interesting to hear people talk about how much better Drake May and Caleb Williams supposedly are than CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. Someday we'll find out for sure. Ross, appreciate you, man. Keep up the great work. Appreciate you jumping on with us. Our Audacy NFL insider, Ross Tucker. We'll talk soon, man. Thanks for coming on,
Sounds
brother.
great. See you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
All right.
Ross.
Good stuff.